I hope you are, because this morning we come to Mars Hill with Paul on this journey to Mars Hill. It's in Acts chapter 17, and we're going to talk about how he got there, how we get there to Mars Hill, and what happened there. And to cover that, we have some folks, Chris and Chelsea Baker, who are going to give us a story. The story. Here you go.
Chelsea and I drew straws. I got the short one, so I get to start. So, Paul is going around on his little missionary tour, his crusades, and he comes along Thessalonica, and he spends about 3 weeks there. He does about 3 Sabbaths, speaking to the people, and he addresses how he goes through the scriptures and he points out how it's pretty much explains how there was no other way Jesus Christ had to die in order to fulfill what the word had said about the Messiah. And everyone's like, wow, this is awesome, as far as the Greeks and as far as the Gentiles in that area were concerned. The Jews, however, were not necessarily thrilled about what he had to say. And they eventually started a riot. And Paul does his little duck and hiding thing, and which he's so very, very good at. And I don't blame him. He's had a lot of practice leading up to this point. And the Jews go around trying to find other people associated with him. They go to Jason's house. And they don't find Paul there, so they drag Jason and his friends out of his house, and they drag him through the streets, shouting that these people are here to cause problems. They're gonna turn our worlds upside down, and they're going against everything we know. And then they drag him before the city officials, and they say these guys have been proclaiming Jesus Christ, this king greater than Caesar, and Caesar is nothing, and they're going around teaching all these things against Caesar, and what are we going to do with them? The city officials make him post a pretty high bail, and then they start an investigation, and while they're doing this, Paul's followers smuggle Paul out, and he goes on to Berea? I can't remember the name. Berea. So I'm bad with names. He goes on to Berea, and he starts the same thing there. And word gets along to the Jews in Thessalonica, and they start the same thing all over again, making trouble. He's going against Caesar. He's preaching this Jesus thing, and we don't like it. He's going to turn all our worlds upside down, yada, yada, yada. Paul makes his escape again. They smuggle him into Athens. And while he's there, he sends word for Timothy and Silas.
So, Paul is in Athens, and he is going around looking at all these shrines and idols everywhere. He is outraged. He's like, what the heck? There are idols everywhere. It's like a junkyard of idols. And so he goes around to people that are like-minded and talks to them about all the idols. They're like, why is there so many idols here? And he's talking to a bunch of intelligent leaders and whatever, and some of them are like giving him these sarcastic remarks like, oh, he's an airhead, blah, 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 because they think he's dumb. And there's other ones who believe what he's saying, and they're taking to his words about Jesus the Messiah. And they arrange for him to speak at a place. Sorry, I don't remember the name. Good old lucky phone. Areopagus. And they want him to do a presentation for everybody because they are so curious about what he's telling them. And so he goes and to Areopagus, and it's a nice quiet place where he can talk to them, and they're like, wow, where did you hear about these things? We are so interested. This is a new take on our gods. And so he makes a stand, and he says, all right, here's the deal, guys. I have been looking at all of your shrines, and I came across one that said, to the God no one knows. That was the inscription on it. And so I would like to tell you about this God and his greatness. The God who created the earth and everyone on it and everything in it doesn't need a shrine to live in. People are not what makes God. God creates people. He doesn't need people running errands for him as if he can't take care of himself. And blank. Sorry. This is really hard to summarize, this part. So he makes the creatures. The creatures don't make him. Starting from scratch, he created the entire human race and made the earth hospitable with plenty of time and space for living so we could seek after God and not grope around in the dark trying to find him. He makes it easy to find him. And he doesn't play hide and seek. He's not remote. He is near. One of the poets from Athens put it well. He said, we are God created. And I was like, well, if we're the God created, then why would we need a sculptor to chisel a God out of stone for us? And so he says, God overlooks all of this craziness and disbelief, but as long as you don't know what's going on. And that's what I just did. I told you what's going on. And God has made a judgment day appointed for everyone. And he has a judge already. And he is confirmed because he was risen from the dead. Risen from the dead evokes some interesting feelings in some of the people that were listening. They were like, oh, risen from the dead. All right, sure, whatever, Paul. And they leave, laughing. But some people believed him, and they followed him. And among those people were Dionysius, another name that I don't remember, Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris.
Right. That last part was hard to summarize. At the Areopagus, which is Mars Hill. Paul at Mars Hill. This is quite an account. If you follow this account, which was just summarized here, if you follow it, it will take your breath away. That's Mars Hill. I'm going to give you a close-up of this. This is a rock here in Athens. And the Apostle Paul presents what will guaranteed, I guarantee it, I guarantee this, if you follow it, what will take your breath away. When have you gotten the wind knocked out of you? Can you think of any times that you recall? Have you had that experience? Let me just find this out. Have you had that experience? The wind knocked out of you? I recall, this is a common time of when folks get the wind knocked out of them, especially if you have the ball in your abdomen and you fall, it goes out pretty good. Or if somebody pushes you and lands on top of you. I recall that experience of having the wind knocked out of me. Do you recall yours? Climbing up a tree, hanging on the bottom of the branch in my backyard of my father's house. Couldn't hold on, and my arm slipped off, landed on my back, and I thought it was over. It's a strange sensation having the wind knocked out of you. It's kind of repeatedly the same in regards to how it looks. I mean, professional and on any level, it looks the same. Some of these are professionals. And there's a treatment plan. I think that is it right there. Putting your knees up seems to be a treatment plan. Of course, you could go to the doctor, but by your time you get to the doctor, it's pretty well over, you know. So, I don't know. I'm sure they have some kind of treatment plan for this. Guaranteed, if you follow what the Apostle Paul does here at Mars Hill, it will take your breath away. It'll be an experience far beyond having the wind knock out of you. No, there are two ways that you can have your breath taken away. One is this kind of collision, and the other is something that is a gassing, causes you to gasp. The Apostle Paul presents here what I guarantee, if you'll follow it, will take your breath away. He kind of does it like this. My God, He's real. We're going to talk about two things. No random perchance events, and the most significant event here. First, this. There are no random perchance events. Have you turned with me to Acts chapter 17? Acts chapter 17, there are no random perchance events. There are none for Paul. There are none for you. There are none. Say this with me. There are none. Say this with me. There are none. No random perchance events. There are none. Here, in Ephesians chapter 2 from the New Testament, it talks about God who works all things after the counsel of His will. They are not random. They are not perchance. God in eternity has counseled Himself concerning the events, and He has brought them to pass, and they unfold for us daily, day by day by day, progressively. That is your life. That, biblically understood, is how much God is in tune with your life and what happens. As a matter of fact, there is not a hair that falls from your head, but that He knows it altogether, and not only knowing it, but get this, has planned this according to the counsel of His will. There is not a bird that comes into your vision, not a sparrow, except He is in tune. That is the magnitude and the detailedness of God, the God who is there according to the Scriptures. There are no random perchance events. Paul's trip in what is called the Macedonian Call, that is what it's known as. If you go with me to Acts chapter 16, which Dr. Stewart put up last week a map very similar to this. I couldn't find his map, so I brought this map up, which is the same. It started down here in Jerusalem, went up into Antioch of Syria. He went back where he had formerly been on his first missionary journey in a place called Galatia to Derbe and Lystra. Now, there's a couple of things that we encounter here that are not random, perchance events. As a matter of fact, what God brings into Paul's life and yours and mine through him are directly connected to what happens here. Let me demonstrate to you. If you're with me in the book of Acts, as I've mentioned, no random perchance events, the Macedonian call, hey, come over and help me. I want you to flip back to the book of Acts chapter 16. Verse 1, Paul came also to Derbe and Lystra, there in the map, here and here in Galatia. And notice what happens here. Who we are introduced to there. In going to Thessalonica, which is where we're headed, he encounters this. There was a disciple there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman, a Greek father. And verse 2, Paul wanted him, he was spoken well of, verse 2. Verse 3, Paul wanted him to accompany him, and he took him with him on the route. Now, do we know anything in the New Testament about Timothy? As a matter of fact, we are taught through this encounter about making disciples and taught a great deal in two books named Timothy 1 and Timothy 2. 1st and 2nd Timothy, which were letters that Paul wrote back to him. So we meet here Timothy, who later in this story of the Bible, we are greatly instructed through. Greatly. We'll do that when we get to that point that Paul writes Timothy. Here's our intro to him. And not only to Timothy, but look who else we meet here. Slide on down with me in Paul's journey. He goes to Troas, and there's the Macedonian call. And verse 11, he set sail from Troas, and he made a direct voyage the following day to these cities, and from there, verse 12, to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. Macedonia, to where God had called him, not per random chance, and a Roman colony. Now, what do we know about the Philippians? Do we know anything more about the Philippians? Paul wrote a letter to the Philippians. And so we meet, of course, the Galatians, which we've already talked about, in the region there of Derbe and Lystra, and the Philippians here. This is who we meet. Notice, he comes here to Galatia, meeting Paul, or Paul meets Timothy, takes him with him up to Troas. Here's the call to Macedonia, goes over to Neapolis, and then to Philippi, the leading city of Macedonia. And we are introduced to what Paul says, I want you to know that what happened unto me really turned out for the advance of the gospel. There are no random, perchance events. Everything that Paul and the Philippians experienced on his way to Thessalonica was determined by God, and he speaks greatly about that. Finally, then, we meet this too. We come to Thessalonica, chapter 17, verse 1. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollyon, they came to Thessalonica, and there was a synagogue there of the Jews. And Paul went, as his custom was, and on 3 Sabbath days, like Chris said, he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and improving that it was necessary for the Christ, the Messiah of the Old Testament, to suffer and to rise from the dead, saying, "This Jesus, whom I proclaim to you, is the Christ." So we're introduced to the Thessalonians. How many letters were there to the Thessalonians? 2. I want you to know, I love the letters to the Thessalonians. They are young believers. They are so, wide opened eyed at what God is doing. Next week, we're going to talk, because we come to this point in the Bible and its story where the Thessalonians are written to by the Apostle Paul, because he was there just such a short time. We're going to see the time he was there. It was just such a short time that he was there. And he writes to them. And he opens his heart. Here, I want to give you a challenge. The 2 letters of Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians, has 5 chapters in it. 2 Thessalonians has 3 chapters in it. That's 8 chapters total. If you start today and you end next Sunday reading 1 chapter per day, you will be so beefed up and ready for the Thessalonian story. I challenge you to do that. Start today, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, and read 1 chapter every day, ending next Sunday, and you come beefed up for it. Amen? All right. You got your challenge. We'll see how well you do. And will I test you? You bet I will. And what happened at Thessalonica? Chris told us what happened. It happens to Paul over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Wouldn't you love to have hung out with Paul? I mean, you end up bailing yourself out of jail for him. That's what happened here. Jason had to pay bail to get out of jail for what Paul had done. Okay? Yeah, now there's some of us who would have such an image that we get so tarnished in our minds by hanging around Paul. There's no way we want to hang around him. And then there's some of us who are thinking, that is so cool. That is so cool. I mean, Jesus comes up over and over and over and over, and he's laid on the table, and people are called to a place where you've got to decide about Jesus. I mean, we are so into evangelism, of trying to evangelize people without them even knowing it, so they don't even have to make a decision, because we've never told them. You have to decide. Are you for him or against him? Paul laid it on the table. That's why he experienced what he did. Because you see, there is a God of this world who wants to bind the minds of the unbeliever so that they don't understand the riches of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. That's the war. And some of us have our image and our reputation that is so big that we wouldn't want a guy like Paul tarnishing this, nor the trouble. Let me tell you this. There are no random, perchance events. There are none. There are none. So Paul gets moved along by Jason, which was probably part of his bail, that he had to pay this amount and make sure that Paul doesn't disturb the city anymore. So Paul and Silas, verse 10, immediately are taken away by night to Berea, which was several miles away. And they arrived there and they went to the Jewish synagogue. So, that's what it was in Thessalonica. This is what it is in Berea. Hey, by the way, what are these Bereans known for? If you've been around the church at all, you know what the Bereans are. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm a Berean. You know what I mean? I'm a Berean. You know what I mean? I mean, there are some churches that call themselves Berean. We are Berean Bible. There is, a matter of fact, a whole group of churches, the Berean Bible Fellowship, because of what they're known for. What are they known for? Yeah, these Bereans, these were the folks that were more noble. That's what the Bible says. Look, that's what it says right here. Look at this. It says, now, verse 11, Paul went and reasoned with them in the Jewish synagogue, and these Jews were more noble. You know what that means? What word noble means? This is God saying this, by the way, in his scriptures. It means that they had come to a higher level. They took it to the next level. They went to the higher rank. How did they do that? How did they go to the next level with the Lord? How did they do that? How did they do it? Pardon me? Yeah, look at what it says here. The Bereans, verse 11, were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with eagerness, and they examined the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. That's why the Berean, okay? Because they examined with a sense of scrutiny what the Bible had said to see, does this that's being told me square with what God has said? Now listen to me right here. There is, to our shame, many believers who are extremely gullible. They hear stuff that is like, whoa, God, and they buy into it without even examining if God is about such a thing. They would rather hear 90 minutes in heaven than a description from the Word of God where He, through an angel, takes you on a guided tour of heaven. And He describes it in detail. Somebody in a semi-conscious state, in an extremely distressing situation, describing heaven, when God has told us via guided tour, the book of Revelation, last 3 chapters. Want to take a tour? Go there. Gullible. Extremely gullible. I want you to know this. That you can cut right through the gullibility and get down to exactly what is true when you take it to a higher level. But you've got to decide that. You've got to decide it. Just like the Bereans had to decide it. If they're going to scrutinize and see if this squares with where God is. It's dangerous to be gullible. Our lives are defined as believers, but not gullible. Higher level. Scripture defines what God is and what He does. And I want you to know, if you know the truth, Jesus said, it will set you free. Bind yourself up if you want in gullibility, or go to the next level and be free. It's up to you. It's up to you. Would you rather read the paper? Or watch the news? Maybe the weather? Then spend some time scrutinizing what God has said. It's up to you. I know the D-bands are working on what God has said. We need to. We need to. Amen? So that's what they're known for. What events happened there? Same thing. More trouble. They came from Thessalonica down to Berea when they heard Paul was there, and they stirred up the agitation. Look with me at it. Verse 13, and when the Jews from Thessalonica heard and learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea, also they came there, and they agitated and stirred up the crowd. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off by way of the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there, and those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after they received a command, a direction from Paul to send Silas and Timothy to me ASAP, as soon as possible, they departed. And so Paul is hanging around Athens. That's how we get there. That's how we get there. And by the way, let me underscore this. There are no random, perchance events. If you'd kind of be ashamed to hang out with Paul, listen to what Jesus said. For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. There are in your life no random, perchance events. Also this which we come to now, Paul at Mars Hill, the let me think here. This is Greek. I've practiced so much at saying this. Areopagus. The Areopagus, which is a translation. Actually, you know what the word means? Pagus refers to hill or rock. And Areus is just a name. It's the rock or the hill of Areus, Areopagus. And when they translate it in Latin, Pagus or Areus translates as Mars. It's Mars Hill. This is the most significant event. This is the most significant event. This is presented here as the most significant event because let me show you what happens here when he gets to Athens. I like Paul. I can relate to Paul. I'll tell you why I like Paul. When he stood around waiting, he just kind of turned on the TV, put his feet up, turned the fan on, made sure he had lemonade and air conditioner. This is what Paul experienced. His spirit was provoked within him. I told my wife one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Matter of fact, they come 2 weeks in a row. Slide with me back to Acts 16 for a moment. Acts chapter 16 and verse 18, the Apostle Paul was experiencing that girl following him and kind of badgering him. And this is what the Bible says. And she kept this on for many days, verse 18 of chapter 16. And Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said, I command you, come out in the name of Jesus. And he came out. That's one of my favorite verses, because I realize I'm not the only one who has a spirit that gets annoyed. It's comforting. That gets provoked. You get provoked? Get angry? Oh, this makes me so angry. When he talks about Paul being provoked, it means that he was infuriated. He looked around and he saw all these things set up, all these beautiful works of art dedicated to false gods. And it provoked him in his spirit. What provokes you? What provokes you? When you don't get supper on time? That's provoking. Provocative. Things don't go our way. That's big. That's big. My name. Yeah. Put down. This provoked him. It provoked him. So he goes and he reasons in the synagogue. Here. We see the most significant event here in the actions that Paul takes. At Athens, Mars Hill, he gets there by doing what he does over and over and over. He goes and talks to a place where they know something about God, and he presents the truth. He reasons with them, it says here, verse 17, in the synagogues. And when he couldn't do it in the synagogues anymore, what was his next plan? Yeah, he goes down to the marketplace. He goes into the coffee shop. He goes into the fast food restaurant, the marketplace, and he just talks to anybody who's there. What a plan. Random? Perchance? Hardly. It's a plan. Got a plan? There were people who didn't like D.L. Moody because of the way he presented the Lord. And he said, I agree with you. It's not very good. What's yours? I don't have one. I just criticize other ones. I know somebody else who's a critic of God and his plan. Here was his plan, really thought through. Whoever was there, hey, let's strike up a conversation here. Guess where that took him? It took him to Mars Hill. Isn't that so much easier to say? Would you agree? I like this. I think they agree out in Oregon, too. Seattle, that's where it is. I bet there's one in Oregon. They're all over, by the way. In Athens, at Mars Hill, the Areopagus. There you go. And he gets there. Now, I want you to see some pictures of the Areopagus, okay? This is the other side of the Areopagus. I showed you an aerial view. This is the ground level view. And let me put these two together by this, okay? This is Mars Hill. And this right here is the access that we're seeing from the other angle, okay? That is the access, and there's the stairway that goes up right there to Mars Hill. And this was the area that through the centuries has been an area that was, shall we say, a court in which a lot of important things were decided. This is where people used to be tried. This is where Socrates was tried, and it was decided that he should drink hemlock because he was such a nuisance. It was Greece here where Socrates had a guy named Plato who was his student, who he taught. And Plato taught Aristotle, who became one of the most profound thinkers throughout all times in regards to influencing even the church. They became Aristotle. Well, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Like Aristotle. And there were some other folks here, Epicurus, who started the Epicureans, and Zeno, who started the Stoic philosophers, and they were all here. This was the area of Alexander the Great, who ruled the whole known world. And this point in Athens was the governing center of Greece. Now, by the time the Apostle Paul gets here, its political power has moved to Corinth, which we're also going to be introduced to soon. But still, the philosophical, the thinking, and the ethics was centered here on Mars Hill. And let me give you another shot of this. That's this angle a little closer up. And this is what we have. Echoes of the Apostle Paul on Mars Hill. This center renowned for its philosophy. It's how you view life and the world. And Paul, in these random perchance events, by talking to anybody who just happened to be in the marketplace, ends up here, giving a defense for Christ. Now, listen to me. Christ is not a philosophy. But I want you to know there is no better philosophy than Jesus Christ's teaching. There are philosophers, many, but they keep stubbing their toe on inconsistency until they get to the point of a scream. And the best philosophy is not to exist at all. Called nihilism. I'm not talking here about vague, faraway, ethereal things. We're talking about people's lives and the center of how you think about life and living it. Christ is not a philosophy that you can't improve on it philosophically. Now, I want you to know that there's a guy named Justin Martyr. Who's ever heard of Justin Martyr in history before, church history? A few? Justin Martyr was a man who wanted to take what Christ, because he was formerly a follower of these philosophers, and he came to Christ, and he wanted to take Christ to these philosophers. And his name is called Martyr because, like Socrates, he became a martyr. Only he became a martyr for Christ. That's why he's called Justin Martyr. That's what he became. Here, we go to the foundation of probably the closest the Bible ever gets to a university setting. Because he goes to this marketplace and he is introduced, follow this, he is introduced to some, verse 18, Epicureans who followed Epicurus, and Stoic philosophers who followed Zeno, and that was revised. And just a word about Epicureanism, okay? This is what we would think of as modern-day secularism, materialism. The only thing that exists is atoms and random motion. Now, you see, this goes a little bit against biblical Christianity because there is no random, perchance events. But their whole idea was all of life is here in what happens randomly. And when people die, they go away. Does that sound like any philosophies around? As a matter of fact, most of the unbelieving people I know live there. I remember my brother telling me, when you die, you're gone and there's nothing more. Is that materialism or what? Is that just living with random motion of atoms or what? That's Epicureanism. It's just follow the train. However you get there, you're on the train. They've been there before. And the Stoics, what were they? Dr. Stewart referred to the Stoics this week at the lunch. We were talking about some things, and he said something about Stoic in regards to medicines and that kind of thing. What were the Stoics about? The Stoics are basically about this. Grin and bear it. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to grin, just bear it. Okay? What is this about? That life has stuff in it. And you just got to handle the stuff. That's all. Just go at it. And you don't have to go at it with desire or love because those are both disappointing. So just go through it. And they had an idea about God God was in everything. That's what he's at. That's what he's dealing with. And they just perchance in the marketplace came to these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, and they said, what is this babbler saying? You know, when they say this babbler, they actually use a word that's called seed picker. Okay, a bird is a seed picker. Have you ever seen a chicken walking around, scratching and pecking? That's what they called him. You're a seed picker. Just like a chicken. What does that mean? Well, you go over here and you pick up a little there, and you go over here and pick up a little there, and you go and you keep just pecking around that stuff. You're just like a seed picking chicken. That's what you're like. You're an idle babbler. Why? Because of what he had said to them about Jesus and the resurrection. And some of them said, no, he's got some kind of false gods, because in their system, there was Jesus who was God, and then there was his wife called the resurrection. And what is this guy talking about? That's what the Bible tells us here. Okay? So they said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take you to Mars Hill. And that's where we're at here. We're at Mars Hill with Jesus and Paul, rather. We're with Paul at Mars Hill. And he sends out here three things. Here's the first thing as he begins to do this. He sets out to them three things. And this is why Chelsea had a little hard time with us, because it's hard to summarize unless you stick this in here. But I want you to know that what he does here, if you follow it, will take your breath away. It will. I guarantee it. It will. It will. It will. He says, first of all, as I was going throughout your city, I noticed an altar here. I wish I could put up a picture of the altar. They don't have the one that was there on Mars or in Athens, but they do have other altars that they have pictures of that say this. This altar is dedicated to the God who we do not know. Okay? That's an interesting statement. First of all, it acknowledges that there's a God that I don't know. Okay? But of course they had so many gods, they just throw another one in. And I may have missed one. So this is the one that I may have missed to him. I don't want him to get uptight about anything. So we'll throw him in there. Well, Paul says, hey, this one that you're referring to? This one you don't know? I'm going to tell you about him. That's what he says. As I was going throughout your city, men of Athens, I perceive that you are very inclined to supernatural things. For as I was going along through your city, I observed objects of worship, and I found this altar to the unknown God. What therefore you worship is unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. Here's the first thing. He's real. He is real. Say this with me. He is real. This God is real. He's going to demonstrate to them about this real God. This thing about God is unknown God is this is fascinating, because God tells us that people know about him even though they don't know him. Romans chapter 1, you could start at verse 15 and just follow right through 16, 17, 18. It says this: for that which may be known about God has revealed to them, for God has made it evident within them. You know what that's saying? That is saying that every single human being has an internal witness about the existence of God. And there's an external thing that confirms this internal thing. And he goes on in Romans and tells us, because ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes and eternal power has been clearly seen through what has been made. So he comes here, so that they are without excuse. Did you hear that? And the Apostle Paul picks up on this internal awareness of God. People who say there is no God, you know why they do that? Psalm 14:1. It's because of their moral twistedness. The sin that they have, they want to deny him because they don't want to be accountable to him for what they like and do. So the Apostle Paul picks up at this unknown God that you have inside of you, that you're aware of inside of you, he's real. He's real. I'm going to tell you about him. What he is as God is where he goes next. This is what he is as God. And I'm just going to give you this quick because I knew I'd probably be here. Whew. This is what he is as God. He, went too far. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. He is creator. He is being Lord of heaven and earth. Doesn't dwell in these things that you've made. He's ruler. He is Lord. This word means that he is in boss. He is charge. He's director. He is the landlord. He is the owner. He is the one who calls the shots. He says he's ruler. And he himself is the one who gives life and breath to all. He is the life giver. This God, this is what he is. Also, he is the one who has determined the exact times and the places where you will live. That you will live in Athens, and you will live in Corinth, and you will live down there in Philippi. Can we move? Of course we can move. And guess who's determined where you'll move to? He is the one who is the determiner. And then this. This is a clincher. I would love to spend time on this. In him. As a matter of fact, he quotes their own poets in two places. He says, in him we live and move and have our being. And he quotes them, showing to them that they did have this internal awareness of this God, and they did know about him. He is our environment. What's the environment of a fish? What's the environment of a worm? What's the environment of people? God. It's God. God is what we live in. God is what we move in. God is where our being is. Our environment is God. And when we are out of tune with God, guess what? We are out of tune with our environment. And life doesn't make sense. As a matter of fact, it gets... Annihilate yourself. Robin Williams, because it gets so hard. This is real. This is real. It's what he is as God. And wow, what he's saying. This is what he's saying. Don't think he's going to live in what you've made, he said. This is what God is saying. Verse 30. The time of ignorance God overlooked, but now, right now, he is transmitting this message. That's what the Apostle Paul says. Right now, he is transmitting this message that all people everywhere are to change their mind and to change their direction, because God has set a day when he will judge the world in righteousness by this man, Jesus Christ, whom he's appointed, and he's proved it by raising Jesus from the dead. Whew. This was Socrates' land. This is Plato's land. This is Aristotle's land. And this is the Apostle Paul bringing the truth of Jesus Christ right to the heart of where the thinking about life in the world is. And he says Jesus Christ is the proof that God will judge people. You know, sometimes I just get quiet and I think, God is going to judge me. What will it be? What will it be when God looks at me and he examines me? What will it be? What will it be? Someday I'm going to open my eyes and it's going to be God face to face with me. Can I tell you this? It's true of everyone. You know what it'll be for me? It'll be wrapped in Jesus Christ. That's what it'll be for me. Because I am in Christ. And he sees only Christ. And you know what it'll be in Christ? It will be reward for giving a cup of cold water in Jesus' name. And because I know that will be my judgment, I think about giving cups of cold water in Jesus' name. Because it'll be reward. You know what it'll be for some people? It'll be face to face with a terrifying and fearful thing. Because it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And they'll open their eyes and they will see God. And he will judge them. Does this take your breath away? I want you to know it will take your breath away. Because in Genesis 2:7, he breathed into man's nostrils and man became a living life. Do this. Do that. I don't want you to hyperventilate. Just do this. Roll it out. You know what that is? That's the breath of life. And this is true also. He takes it away. Someday. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Someday. Your flesh and your heart will fail. But God can be the strength of our heart and our portion forever. Father in heaven, we come before you because this is the truth of where we live. This is it. This is our life. And in Christ we have every hope, every provision. Couldn't possibly be any better for us. Because Jesus is my standing, Jesus is my future, Jesus is my hope, Jesus is how you see me. But without him, we're lost. Lord, I'd be a fool to give up and follow you. In Jesus' name.